A lot of you have been lied to, and you've been led to believe that this is a sport now built for the very few at the expense of the very many. And if you're not named Alabama or Ohio State or Clemson, there is no seat for you at the playoff table. Now, you know we don't really believe in college football playoff segments here much at all, and especially in the preseason. But the entire context of this is quit worrying about the playoff. And if you are worried about the playoff, you need to look at it from a more access-oriented lens, because I think there's room for several programs this year. But to have that, you have to have vulnerability, which means the big boys have to have some mortality about themselves, and I think they have it this year. Now, what I'm about to say is going to sound extremely negative to some programs that aren't used to hearing negativity. It's not. What I am doing is I'm saying if you were to clip Ohio State, if you were to get Clemson or Bama or Georgia, Oklahoma, this is how it would happen. And this is more realistic than it may seem. So let's start with Ohio State. Now, this is one we've talked about a lot, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. I think that you're going to have to see it before you believe it. But even this week 1 situation where they go to Minnesota, it's just not an easy spot. Week 2 against Oregon's one that everyone's going to be paying attention to. But there is really no Ohio State fan that's going to look at the Minnesota game and say, I'm worried we lose that. A lot of Ohio State fans have privately confided in me, I'm a little bit worried about it. But what they expect, even the ones who are worried, is we're going to start off early. It's going to be really rocky. It's going to be terrible, but we'll pull away and we'll win like 38-20 at the end. But you never know until you know. And no coaching staff's ever had to deal with this. The whole, we've got a lot of young guys who have never played in a full stadium before, and we got to take them on the road in week 1 against a really experienced team. And specifically offensive line, running back, the kind of elements that can shave possessions off the clock if they start getting that thing rolling downhill. Minnesota's got all that, and that have the home field. Now, normally, I don't waste time talking about home field because when you see the @ symbol, you know where it is. I don't need to tell you. I think it's undervalued here. So that's the first element. The second element is if Ohio State has not made improvement in their secondary, and C.J. Stroud is a good quarterback, but even out of all that competition, him being the best, he never quite plays to the level of Justin Fields, therefore never fully taking advantage of the weapons around him. This is a team that has that kind of vulnerability about it. Now, granted, I think it's early in the year where they're the most vulnerable, but don't just assume because they have all the talent in the world that it's going to play to that capability right off the bat. I don't expect that. Like, I think Ohio State will beat Minnesota, but I would be surprised if they did just run up and down the field on them. So I expect a battle in week 1. Therefore, I won't be disappointed. I will only be pleasantly surprised. How about Bama? This is the one that's preseason number 1 on most of the polls I've seen. I saw, you know what, I'm not going to even mention that. So how do you beat Alabama? Well, in this particular year, I spoke about this earlier in the show, so I'm going to talk about it again. I think a lot of folks in Tuscaloosa and out of Tuscaloosa are going to take for granted that the timing and rhythm and therefore the lethal nature of last year's offense is going to carry over. There are some out there who doubt it. It's not just because they're replacing starters. Bama's had years where they had a bunch of new starters and they ended up improving. It's not that. It's the specific elements I'm talking about. Like Mac Jones went in the first round, so he was plenty appreciated, but the specific facet of his game was that you never had to slow down when he threw a ball to you. He hit you in stride every time. And so they already had first-round receivers everywhere, but when those guys don't have to slow down when they're catching the ball, and you got Najee Harris in the backfield able to do that too, that really turns the lights out on 99% of teams or 100% of teams last year in America. That is not just going to be there in week 1 or week 3 or week 6. It's not just going to be there. Now, eventually, I think they're going to have a product that they put on the field that will be among, if not the best in the country this year. They may be the best in the country wire to wire. That doesn't mean they can't get beat. And so think about this. Think about some 3rd and 6 situations where last year they convert, and this year it's just a ball behind a receiver, or Bryce Young's a little bit smaller in stature, some balls tipped at the line. It just changes 1 or 2 possessions in a game. How are you going to quantify the value of 1 or 2 possessions in a game before the game's played? You can't. You don't know how the opposition is going to take advantage of the opportunity or not. But that is the difference sometimes. That's what it takes. See, when Bama lost to Ole Miss a couple of years in a row, They were the best team both times. It doesn't matter. They got beat because that kind of stuff happened. I think one of them was like a 5-turnover game. So we don't know at all how effective that offense is going to be coming out of the gate. Now, they're going to have a pretty lethal defense, and I will grant you that. I don't have much doubt about that. But I just think a lot of the nature that you became so accustomed to last year in labeling them this Death Star of a team, which they were, is expected to carry over. And you think, oh, well, if it all doesn't come over, 80% of it will come over. No, 0% of it comes over. You got an entirely new product this year that you have to build. And what percentage of production will you get relative to what you got last year? Well, that's a bigger question. But man, I think that there's going to be some stumbling out of the gate for them. They're going to be the better team on the field every time they play. As far as I can look at their schedule this year, doesn't mean they can't be beaten, though. How about Clemson? Clemson's a program that is not going to be tested nearly to the degree that some of these other programs are in this year. But where are the question marks? Like, how would you beat them? Well, backup quarterback is one that they're talking about a lot. I don't think nationally people are talking about it so much because no one ever plans on seeing a backup quarterback play. But the last couple times they've had trouble, it's been because the backup quarterback was in the game, or it's been when the backup quarterback was in the game. I wouldn't say DJ is the reason they lost to Notre Dame last year, but he was in the game. They don't have anything that they can win with at a championship level behind DJ Uiagalelei. So let's just assume he's going to play and stay healthy the whole year, and we'll kiss the sky on that one. The interior of their offensive line has obviously been a focal point throughout Preview Magazine season. It's been a focal point for this coaching staff. It's something that's going to be tested right away in Week 1 against Georgia. And the reason I focus on that is it's the interior. It's not necessarily tackles we're talking about here. Is because DJ Uiagalelei, for all of his accolades, is not the runner Trevor Lawrence was. And so when you're getting disruption up the middle, and you're counting on that passing game to really win you ball games, that can spell an issue. And again, it's not some season-long problem. If it results in a couple of stalled drives or maybe a tip ball up in the air that gets intercepted in one game, you just never know when that is the one that cost you. And for Clemson, costing you in one game is a little bit different. Bama loses a game. Georgia loses a game. Well, they can afford to. Oklahoma loses a game. They can afford to. You don't necessarily know if Clemson can just afford to lose a game. Even the Georgia game, which brings me to another point that they have no control over, unfortunately, and it's the rest of the ACC. You see, I think the ACC will be better this year. As a collective conference, I think it'll be a very good product. But I don't know that. I could be wrong. It's happened before. Probably will happen again. And so if they don't get cooperation out of their own conference and they were to lose to Georgia in Week 1, even if they win the rest of the way, you start to ask yourself, do they need help elsewhere? Now, my personal opinion is if they lose in Week 1 and take care of business, they're going to be in. But it's not a slam dunk. So that's an element they don't even have control over. The control they have is win the game, win all the games they play. But I do think, yes, offensive line in particular, that's an area they can be had. And, here's another fun thing to watch. Another fun thing to watch is when they came out of that game against Ohio State last year, Brent Venables was on record, Dabo was on record as saying, we really are disappointed that we were not physical. We just weren't physical enough at the line of scrimmage. And a lot of those guys are back. The only difference is they've added another year on their birth certificate. They're back. But we all know something else is in play, too. There were a lot of young guys who have added a year of development at a very key portion of your life to physically develop. So I don't think physicality, especially defensively, is going to be an issue for them this year. How about Oklahoma? How are you going to beat the Sooners? Well, they themselves have a very big piece to replace at center. The guy's name was Creed Humphrey, so he's off to the league. They ask the center to do a whole lot. Most offenses do. But Lincoln Riley will tell you, we ask ours to basically be a NASA astronaut that just happens to play football instead. And so when we lose one, that's why they always go to the NFL. But the downside for us is it's really hard to replace them. Luckily, they have recruited to where they can develop and replace. And so they feel good. If you talk to people close to Oklahoma, they feel good. Staffs have felt good about replacements before and ended up finding out that when the lights came on, they were a little bit higher on them than they should have been. So we'll see. I'm not even specifically talking about Oklahoma at that point. That applies to a lot of folks. But football, again, comes down to very specific matchups in any given week, very specific situations, very specific drives. And so I'm not looking at Oklahoma saying, ooh, that center, that's going to be a problem for them all year long. It could be that it's great 80% of the time, but it could be also that they come up on a team that is a matchup problem on the interior that ends up throwing the crowbar in the bicycle spokes of the timing and rhythm of their offense that ends up leading to a loss. So that's how you clip them. And the other way you clip them is to have Spencer Rattler himself be rattled and just not quite be that assumed 15 to 20% better quarterback than he was a year ago. Now, he played much better down the stretch last year, and so it's always assumed that there'll be just a year-over-year incremental improvement. You know, you remember Trevor Lawrence won a national title as a freshman. True freshman. So the question was, man, how are we going to stop him from winning 2 more? Tua, at halftime, comes in as a true freshman, wins 1. How are we going to stop him from winning a couple of more? Neither one of them ever won a title again. Neither one of them did. So don't just assume these guys get better after year 1, is what I'm saying. I expect Spencer Rattler to, but how much better does he have to get for them to buzzsaw the entire competition? Because last year they lost a few games. You know, we talked about that earlier. It's not just on him, but higher level quarterback play can bail you out. So are they going to get the caliber quarterback play this year that has that bailout potential? Lastly, let's talk the University of Georgia. How are you going to beat Georgia? Well, Clemson stands a very good chance. They are favored in the game against Georgia in week 1. One of the things they're going to have to worry about at Georgia is health issues. They've already had them crop up this year. I mean, they're dealing with them right now as we speak, so that's been well documented. So it could just be that injuries and health issues derail them. Also, there are a couple of positions, one we've spoken about, one we really haven't. I did the Junkyard Dogcast with Jake Rowe a couple of weeks ago. And he specifically was talking about that outside linebacker spot, which is viewed as, if anything, a strength because of the names in those positions. Behind those names is mystery, is total mystery. They need to stay healthy there. Now, they don't have injuries there right now. They need to stay healthy there. And like we've already seen, they can't be affording to drop guys in the secondary either. And so quickly, when you watch Georgia, if they have any kind of issue at outside linebacker or any more issues in their secondary, it could quickly lead to a situation where their pass rush isn't there and pass coverage isn't there, and as a result, they're having to ask their offense to do something they've really never really asked their offense to do, and that's go out and trade points and outscore folks. Now, they already want to be committed to that kind of offensive approach this year, but they want to do it in terms that dictate, not in terms that react. And so if you were to get Georgia, that's how you'd get them. Now, even having said that, you look at the schedule, and even I'll admit, after that week 1 game against Clemson, it's hard to spot the losses. I asked on Twitter today, do you think there are some 2-loss teams here? I pretty much listed all the teams we've talked about. And a lot of folks who said, yes, I think there's a 2-loss team there, they said Georgia. Well, look at the schedule here if you're on YouTube. I mean, they play Clemson. Yeah, anyone could see that. The Tigers are favored. But where? Even if things go wrong now, where are they tripping up? Is it when Arkansas comes in? Is it when they go to Auburn? I mean, does anyone, in other words, have confidence that that offense at Auburn is going to be capable of taking advantage of those kinds of inefficiencies or weaknesses or potential mistakes? The Florida game's the obvious one you would circle. I think some folks more inside the league in the SEC would say watch out for Missouri. All right, but I'm asking you going to pick the upset or not? And most people wouldn't. So it would be probably the conference championship game would be the next one you would circle. So I'm not telling you that, you know, all these folks are racking up 2 or 3 losses, but I am telling you there are going to be some losses. There's probably, out of the 5 teams we just listed, Ohio State, Bama, Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, there's at least one 2-loss team there. There may be a couple of 2-loss teams there. College football be crazy like that.